Really, when you're a developer, it's all about feedback loops. It's all about having like the shortest amount of feedback. You don't want to have to wait for a deploy to find out you had a bug. You want to find that out on your local machine and then fix it before you deploy. And staging environments and fast branch deploys kind of help with this, but you really need an amazing local dev experience. In our industry, speed is everything. And you can't have 2 or 3 second cold starts. It's fine for an enterprise back office kind of app, but for a front-end facing, user-facing thing, you just can't have these kind of cold starts.
Hey, this is Brian, and you're listening to JAMstack Radio, a bi-weekly series where we discuss the JAMstack, a new way of building websites and apps that are fast, secure, and simple to work with. JAMstack Radio is brought to you by Heavybit, a program dedicated to helping startups take their developer products to market. For more information, visit heavybit.com. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, find us on Twitter at JAMstack Radio. Welcome to another installment of JAMstack Radio. On the line, I've got Brian LeRoux. Brian, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us why you're here?
Yeah, sure. I'm a web developer. I've been doing this web thing for quite a long time, and I'm a big fan of the empowerment of what the web has enabled. And I've always kind of hung around the front end web community even before there was one. And I think the reason I'm here is to talk a little bit about the JAMstack, but also my company Begin, and how we kind of intersect with that world and what that whole world means. And I guess it's worth mentioning, in my former life, I worked on a project which is renowned for being one of the most loathed projects on Stack Overflow, PhoneGap and or Cordova. So for the listeners, I apologize if it gave you trouble. It wasn't my fault. It was Adobe's. And if it was great for you, then that's awesome. It was because of me.
And you worked at that as an Adobe employee at the time?
Yeah, I did. I started working on that project with a sort of a group of misfits in Vancouver in 2007, 2008 timeframe. And PhoneGap is like a lot of webby open source projects. It was immediately a huge success right away. I'm joking. So we started working on it in 2007, and we kept working on it until about 2011 when we got acquired by Adobe.
Oh, wow.
So there was a long period of questionable opportunity cost spent working on that one, but it grew consistently the entire time. And then by the time we got acquired, it was a runaway train. I think we ended up becoming responsible for about 20% of the App Store. And today, I think the torch has been taken up by Ionic.
Yeah.
That crew, the capacitor JS stuff, and they're still growing like gangbusters. So there's definitely something to this internet thing. It's always growing.
Yeah, I mean, even with the mobile space, like we've got Ionic and then React Native and Expo and all these other, what was the one made in Dart? Flutter?
Oh, Flutter. Flutter's cool. Yeah, I like that one. And I don't mind Dart. Dart had such a strange start that I think it sort of alienated itself with the JavaScript developers. But luckily, time has gone on long enough that it looks a lot like TypeScript and no one knows.
Yeah. I mean, that's how it feels. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's typed. It's a beautifully designed language. It came from a lot of the best minds at Google. So it's funny that it found its niche over in mobile, though. It wasn't something I had expected for it to happen, but yeah.
Yeah,
cool.
I mean, it definitely came out of left field for sure. But speaking of left field, so we originally met at Reactathon 3 years ago.
Yeah.
I was emceeing, and then you were one of the speakers, and you gave an amazing talk. I think you were talking about Arc at the time. I'm not even sure if Begin was around at that time.
Probably not, yeah. Yeah, so Architect is the open core, as it were, of Begin. And Architect is a framework for building serverless apps. And there's a bunch of these out there. So the first kind of question usually is, why would you have another framework for serverless apps? We got Terraform, we have serverless.com. And the reason is because we needed to build something that was going to have really good latency characteristics for building a bot. The first version of Begin was actually a Slack bot. And you can't have a bot that's got a cold start.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the early versions of serverless frameworks out there did what everyone does. And people still do this today. You'll take your function and you'll put an Express web server in it. and that works. And it's totally okay to do that. I don't want to dissuade anyone from trying it out because it's fun to do. But as your app grows, your function will get larger because you're going to add more code to it. And as you're adding more and more code to it, it's going to cold start slower. And so you want to break that up into a bunch of small functions. And most of these frameworks don't really guide you down this road. And so this is one reason that Architect's a lot different from other projects out there, in that we guide you into a path where you're splitting up your app into constituent single responsibility principal functions that are very small. And first sort of inclination of this is, oh no, now you're going to have lots of functions. Your Rails app has lots of functions. It just doesn't have any isolation between them. So this is the only major difference, that you're isolating these things into their own little containers. And then when they go to cold start, there's no penalty because they're loading less stuff. So yeah, we kicked off Architect. I think we open sourced it in 2017, and it's been under very active development ever since. We're now doing something like an average of 4 or 5 pull requests from external contributors a week. We had 80,000 downloads last year, and as a measure of the year prior in 2019, we had 10,000 downloads. So there's a real acceleration towards serverless, and people are looking for ways to do it that are frictionless and that have really good latency characteristics, and that's kind of our sweet spot.
Okay, and speaking of sweet spot, so tell us about Begin and what that is.
Yeah, so this is always fun. When you've got an open core, there's like what's the relationship between the open thing and the commercial thing. So Begin.com deploys Architect applications, and the commercial entity that is Begin.com is set up to make this whole thing very frictionless. One of the main things I learned with Architect is front-end developers are rightfully terrified of Amazon. They look at that AWS console and they think, whoa, what am I looking at? Where is my app? And how do I make sure that it doesn't blow my credit card out of the water? And so that intimidation level is something that we sort of strive to solve with Begin. We sign in with GitHub. You click one button, you'll have an app deployed on Amazon in roughly 30 seconds or less. And that's not an exaggeration. We time this. Much of our deploys usually net in around 7 to 13 seconds. My goal is to get that to 0 seconds. And this is not because Begin is super special. This is all downstream of the scale and capability of AWS. But all that complexity of getting started is kind of locked away from a lot of developers. So Begin just makes this frictionless and lets you get started really quick.
Okay, and what is the process of getting started? I mean, I've done this myself, but for the sake of the listener, like how would they sort of begin with Begin?
Yeah, and this is something I think we're going to always have to make easier. Right now, you sign in with GitHub and you can select a starter template app and you're off to the races. We're looking at making this a more local development workflow friendly situation. You can use all of our stuff locally today, but to get started, it's very similar to Heroku. You sign in with your GitHub, and then you'll generate a repo, or you'll hook us up to an existing repo. And then we just start deploying every time you commit after that. So it's fairly frictionless, but my ideal would be it's completely frictionless. So like there is no sign-in step, and then there's just magic and you deploy. And we'll get there. It's a interesting challenge because you want to have the CI/CD and you want to have the GitHub integration, and you want to put people where they're comfortable and they're working. But really, when you're a developer, it's all about feedback loops. It's all about having like the shortest amount of feedback until like you don't want to have to wait for a deploy to find out you had a bug. You want to find that out on your local machine and then fix it before you deploy. And staging environments and fast like branch deploys kind of help with this, but you really need an amazing kick-ass like local dev experience, and that's another thing that we get out of Architect and the open core, and something that we're striving to make easier with Begin. But right now, pretty much, if you've got a GitHub account, you should be 30 seconds away from deploying on Amazon.
Okay, excellent. And I love the seconds in deploying, and that your goal to get down to 0.
Yeah,
it's one thing that when I worked at Netlify, that I sort of took pride in, that I was able to stand on stage or write a blog post, and from the moment you figure out Netlify existed, like you're only about 30 seconds from having a site actually in production. So I love that strategy for adoption, and it sounds like you're loving that too as well.
Yeah, and I mean, Netlify really, they made this mainstream in so many ways, and like we look up to what they've done and a lot of the work they've done, especially for developer experience. It's great, and we just want to bring that to the whole stack and have that for like everything that you do with AWS infra in particular. I can remember when GitHub first launched Jekyll support and GitHub Pages, and this was a big deal back then because back then, if I wanted to stand something up on the internet, it was a real rigmarole. You had to find your DNS. You had to likely get signed up at Heroku, but maybe it was Linode. You had to set these servers up and reverse proxies. And Tom Preston Werner and crew there were just like, no, you're deploying a static site. Just put that up there and let that be the thing. And then Netlify really took that and ran with it.
Yeah.
And the question I have now for the JAMstack, and this is more of like a heady kind of philosophical question. We know that deploying static assets is faster. And we know that having it pre-rendered means you don't have to do any work on your server to get that stuff over. And that's great, and it works. There's obviously trade-offs along the way. You have to wait for build steps. If you have a huge app, it's going to take longer to get it up there, and you'll be waiting for it to deploy. But generally, these trade-offs are pretty good, and they're fairly manageable if you use a service like Netlify. At some point, serverless compute, in particular Lambda, is going to drop to 0 cold start. And it's not a if, it's a when. And right now, our cold starts are around 50 milliseconds, 50 milliseconds. So not something humans can perceive. The reason we did all this static asset Jekyll stuff was because we didn't want to wait for servers to do things. We don't have to wait for servers anymore. So the challenge for the future of the JAMstack will be, do we need to pre-render? Should this be static? And I think we're starting to see people ask that question in the framework world. You've got Redwood, you've got Remix, you've got Next, you've got Blitz. I don't know. There's another one every week. SvelteKit is the other one that's kind of seeing this, and they're hybridizing. They're moving beyond just static, and they're starting to use a dynamic trusted process for server render as well. And I think this is where it all evolves, but I'm not sure. And it's a good time because we're at the bleeding edge, and it's Wild West.
Yeah, and you even see folks like Gatsby who help champion things like the JAMstack and the statically rendered assets and build on time to building. But even they're experimenting with sort of, you can build portions of the app. So if you need something statically built, like your landing page, that gets built, but also experimenting. And also, I think Next is they've sort of led the charge in the JAMstack world of having that sort of hybrid model.
Totally.
I think Redwood and Blitz are sort of really running with it and sort of pushing it to the boundaries of what it means. I've seen the evolution of the JAMstack, even the home, jamstack.org, it's updated. It's more than static.
It is.
You might have something that's dynamically rendered. So yeah, it's some pretty good insight.
Well, then there's nothing in that manifesto that said it had to be pre-rendered.
No, it just happened to be a feature.
And Netlify gets us. They added functions. And so sort of from my perspective is what happens when the function model is predominant and there's no performance penalty, and they just run instantly and they go away instantly and statelessly. And what does that enable? And how do we take best advantage of that? I mean, these things are so cheap. So 1 million Lambda invocations is free. The next million is something like 10 cents. So you could be, pumping literal millions of requests to your Lambda function and still not pay $1. And that's a whole different ballgame in every way possible. So we can now, sure, you can serve a static site. You can do a workaround for your dynamic routes. You could just put your whole site in one Lambda function and probably serve it just fine and have extremely cost-effective trade-offs for that.
Yeah.
And that's a wildly radical idea right now, but I expect over the years that will look pretty boring.
Is Begin only AWS only?
Yeah, we are. And that was very deliberate. So, my PhoneGap history, and I did that whole thing. And when I started working on PhoneGap, it was all about BlackBerries. And, iPhone was obviously going to be this big thing. We all knew it. But at the earliest moments, there was still a ton of momentum and traction for BlackBerry. There was this new weird operating system called Android that looked promising. If you were in Europe and you didn't have a Nokia phone, you were a weirdo. So there was a whole set of operating systems for that. And so in PhoneGap's world, I pursued it all simultaneously. And I've seen other founders doing this with the cloud as well. It was a mistake. We got lucky. I put a lot of resources on BlackBerry for a lot of years, and I didn't have to do that. I could have probably focused a ton of our attention just on iOS and Android, and it would have been just as successful, if not more successful today. So I'm not going to make that mistake with cloud. I know who iOS is. I don't know who BlackBerry is. Yeah. I'm just waiting to see what happens. And these clouds will market themselves as capability equivalent, and they are not. So in particular, I'm very excited about Azure. I think Azure has a shot at number 2. I don't think it is number 2. I think that is to be determined. they've got distribution with GitHub, and they've got distribution with NPM, they've got Visual Studio Code, so they have a lot going for them. But on the ground, for their infrastructure as code solution, they've got a thing called ARM, Azure Resource Manager. It isn't anywhere near where CloudFormation is, so I can't create the same kind of deterministic fast builds that I can on AWS, and that's kind of table stakes for me. I expect them to catch up eventually. And the other aspect to this is that the way the function execution model works is different across clouds. Amazon has a thing called Firecracker, which is as cool as it sounds. It's like this mini virtual machine orchestrator thing. You don't have to worry about it. The TLDR of it is it's a stripped down operating system, and it's really, really fast. All the other clouds use a variant of Kubernetes or something like it to boot their functions primitives, which is a nice way of saying they're slower. And in our industry, speed is everything.
Yeah.
And you can't have 2 or 3 second cold starts. It's fine for an enterprise back office kind of app, but for a front end facing, user facing thing, you just can't have these kind of cold starts. So I'm anticipating eventually Azure fixes these problems, and I'll look at being portable to them. But in the meantime, Alibaba might come up and eat their lunch.
Yeah, that's true.
And instead of trying to like spray and pray and do all these clouds, I'd rather just be amazing on Amazon, because I know they're going to be around a long time.
Yeah, and the thing that I bank on tools like Begin and all these other interfaces between the cloud for myself is that I don't want to learn AWS console. Like I've learned it like probably 5 times since I started developing. And every time I go back a year later, I'm like, oh, I could probably figure this out. Like I had to do some transcriptions, and they have a great transcription service, AWS Transcribe or something. So if I want to take this podcast, transcribe it, it's like just go directly to the metal and get that stuff transcribed. Yeah. But it's a horrible interface.
It's unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah.
And they change it too. I have a panic attack like once every few weeks when they change that interface, because I'm like, oh my God, where did everything go?
Yeah.
How do I find it again?
And that's what I love about, like, if you mentioned Arc or Begin, I log in with my GitHub, like stuff works. All I want to do is just ship my code. I don't want to spend like a full week watching conference talks to make sure I'm up to speed.
Yeah, and that's sort of the theory. I think, there's always going to be a need for things to move to a higher level. And Amazon's such an interesting company. They're not designed for a vertically integrated experience. They are very designed around, like people say, oh, 2 pizza teams, and like that's a good thing. And it is a good thing, but it's interesting to see when that is applied at scale, what happens. Like they really do that. And so all of these products are these little fiefdom teams that are independently organized around basically the principles of AWS's infrastructure, which is that things have an interface, things have an SDK, things log, and then otherwise they might have CloudFormation support and they might have full console support, but otherwise they just ship as fast as they can. And in some cases, there are even teams competing with each other, like products within AWS that are very similar to each other. So it's hard to decrypt what's going on. And people ask like, well, why are they doing that? Well, this is a land grab. So the cloud is as big as any paradigm shift ever has been. And they're trying to get as much of that land as they can. So they're going wide right now instead of going super deep on a prescriptive sort of like, here's how you're supposed to build your app and here's where you're going to put your data. They're like, nah, here's 5 databases and we have 5 more coming out next week. And use the one that makes sense for you. And I imagine in the longer scope of time, Amazon's going to start addressing this. We see this with other companies in other sectors in the past where they go wide and they'll go deep later. And I think that's what's going on, but cloud is very competitive. There's Azure, Alibaba, GCP, AWS. They're competing right now largely on these capabilities. So they're going to just keep adding more and more and get more and more complicated, which is great because then providers like us can say, okay, Amazon's never going to tell you to not use it, EC2. They're never going to say it. I'm going to say it right now. If you have no use case for EC2 at this point, there is a very low probability you need to boot a VM. But you probably need to talk to Node. And if you need to do that, then a really great way of doing it is Lambda. And if you need to do that really quickly, then Begin's a good solution for you.
Excellent. Yeah, that's quite the concise pitch too as well. And like in my mind, like if I can bump up my Simver version and get access to the new Amazon stuff through Begin, like that's the world I want to live in.
Yeah, you want their superpowers. You just don't want the the origin story that it takes to get those superpowers. It's like a horrible comic book villain moment where you gotta like succumb to the console.
Yeah, and it's funny because I remember like roughly 3 years ago, I was spending a lot of time learning Docker and Kubernetes and thinking that, I have to go learn how the cloud works. But now I'm at the point where I'm so far abstracted away from it. Like I'm not buying Kubernetes books. Like I'll go to KubeCon to find out the new providers, but I don't really need to know Kubernetes anymore. I am banking on infra people to keep that stuff up and running.
Yeah, and it might not even be Kubernetes in the future for all we know.
Yeah.
Like there's just so many different ways to go about orchestrating these like compute workloads that span past one computer basically. As soon as you get to 2 computers, you're now scaling. And as soon as you're scaling in a distributed system, you've got all kinds of new problems. And this is why I think this was the end game for the cloud the whole time, because why would I be thinking about my IP address ranges if I'm just returning a string for a web page? It's a little bit over the top. I shouldn't need to have to like deal with my ingress and egress IP rules. It's a web page. Just let me serve the thing. I think our industry goes through these like vacillations of complexity and configurability, and then usually we reject it outright and move over to simpler, easier, more deterministic, higher level things. Like I remember when Java was all the rage, and then this upstart Ruby on Rails had the audacity to ask, what about developer happiness?
Yeah.
And so many people were mad. Like people were literally mad. They were like, this Ruby thing, it'll never scale. We don't want that. Developers, who cares if they're happy? And, we know how that story worked out. The developers became very happy and they deployed tons of Rails stuff, and Ruby became a de facto for many of the .coms that we use every day today.
Yeah.
And Node was kind of an extension of that. And now the pendulum's actually swinging back, I think, towards more rigor and more configuration and more formality. Like we see TypeScript as a good example of that in its rise.
Yeah, and we're also seeing the pendulum, like even things like Rust now having its sort of day in the sunlight.
Yeah.
I mean, we have an M1 chip now thanks to Apple, and everybody's like, ooh, M1.
Yeah.
But only just this week we can now do Homebrew on M1 chips. But anyway, that's besides the point.
No, I was waiting for that too. Like my hand's been hovering over the buy button for like 2 months now. I'm just dying to get that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, thanks to GitHub, I get a new laptop in 2 weeks because I hit my 3-year anniversary. So
nice.
It could not be better timing to sort of figure out how this M1 works.
Are you going to go with an Air, or are you going to wait for because I heard they're going to do a Pro.
Yeah.
This is the rumor anyways. Probably the day you order an Air, they'll come out with this amazing Pro. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah. I'm actually trying to hold out until the beefier version comes out, hopefully summerish time.
Yeah.
Because like nothing's dying right now as far as machines. With that being said, my wife's laptop literally just died. Her 6-year-old Touch Bar Mac just completely...
I have never been mad about a computer, and that one did it. That one was like, They removed my MagSafe, which just made me so livid, but I was like, okay, fine. And then they ruined the keyboard, the like main interface. This is Apple.
Yeah, the amount of times that computer has fallen off the bed because the lack of MagSafe, and like this a toddler running through the bedroom and knocking the plug out the wall.
Oh my God. I mean, see, that's a different kind of stress.
Yeah, the reverse of innovation. But speaking of what, I want to ask real quick about begin.com pricing. Like, how do you make money?
Yeah.
Like, I think everybody's sort of like interested, but want to know, like, is this going to sustain itself?
Yeah, for sure. And so the first thing to know is that we deploy architect apps. So anything that we deploy is deployed with CloudFormation, so you can leave at any time. So if you build an app with us and we aren't meeting your needs, then you can deploy directly to Amazon without Begin in the way. So there shouldn't be any kind of fear of being locked into us and the startup runs out of funding or disappears. We do charge. We have customers paying us real money and everything, and it's currently gated behind a wait list. So I guess I'm comfortable saying this. We have about 1,000 apps per Amazon org account. We have about 1,000 of those. And it's fine. They can't access each other. They're all locked down with IAM. But what can happen is you can get a noisy neighbor. So you could have someone on the same Amazon account as you pumping a bunch of traffic, and you could get throttled as a result. I've been calling this one internally the Wes Boss effect, because Wes was on our free tier and he was throttling it a few times, which is great. That's what it's for, and that's why we want people out there kicking the tires. But if you manage to trigger the West Boss alarms, then we'll kindly invite you to join our paid tier, where we'll give you your own Amazon account, totally set up for you and totally isolated for you. We're charging $25 a month for that.
Okay.
And then we have a wait list for this right now. We have a Pro Plus tier coming where we'll deploy to anyone's Amazon account. You just have to give us the creds, and we'll run Begin on your AWS for you. So it's kind of like a cloud modern version of on-premises. I'm trying to find like a way to like describe this. Effectively, the story is you've got existing resources in a database or something like that. You have a reason to be on your own Amazon account, and you need to talk to that existing database or those existing resources. So that's the use case. And we'll deploy into your VPC if that's what you need us to do. So it's like on-premises, but it's more like on your cloud, I guess. I don't know if we can ask the viewers to come up with a better term for this. But this is all in the roadmap. I hope to have us fully GA'd before the summer this year. So it's only reason that we've got it behind a beta right now is that we've been trying to figure out how to scale it with the team size that we have. And I think we figured that out at this point. It's pretty self-serve and fairly on demand, and we're going to just completely automate that all away.
Excellent. And how big is the team currently at Begin?
We are 5, so we are quite small. It's myself, my co-founders Ryan Block and Christopher Joseph, and then we've got a couple of amazing devs, Paul Chin Jr. and Sean Jose have been keeping the support deluge down to a reasonable amount of levels and helping us build out example apps. And
excellent.
Actually, Sean's been on a mission lately for us that I really appreciate. He's been working on trying to figure out how to write the documentation for every possible DNS registrar. Because when we initially launched, we were like, yeah, it's great. Just use this with Route 53. And like, nobody wants to use Route 53.
No, I mean, unless you're going to build a service for it to interface between it, yeah.
Yeah, and I understand. And so like and every one of these registrars is totally different. So like we did some instructions for Cloudflare, we did some for Namecheap and DNS Simple and one.com, and like the list is just going on and on and on. So
it's almost too big.
Yeah, I don't have a great answer for this because I want to automate it, but these things are very different from each other, and they all use the same terms but in different ways, and it's just an ugly, sticky documentation project.
Yeah, it was actually one of my first features at Netlify. I was building it was my interview.
Oh yeah,
basically project was building the DNS dashboard. So it was like my first time writing Go because I had to talk to their services, and then I built their React app to sort of do all the handling of the form. That's
a bit deep end.
It was. It really was. But they'd had a really good internal API. I was also employee 3, so there was no real structure to the interview process. So like they just had people build features.
That's great.
And contract them, and then if it worked out, it worked out. If it didn't, at least you got to walk away with a little bit of money.
Yeah.
But it was a great experience, and but I also that was painful trying to because I use the same DNS I've been using since like I started buying domains in college.
Yeah.
Which is hover.com, by the way. They don't sponsor this podcast, but we'll just throw them out there. And but yeah, I knew how to use that one, and that's how I tested it. Then I found out really quickly, people would just throw out like random DNS and be like, "Hey, it doesn't work with this one." I was like, "Okay."
Yeah, it's so weird. There's so many of these providers. They're all different. They all use similar terms, and programming against it's very hard. And even programming against Amazon's, which is quite stable at this point, is pretty hard. Like DNS is very throw the dart. Wait 20 minutes, see if it worked, and then like ask a friend on the phone, hey, can you load this page?
Well, that's what I like about so Netlify with Netlify functions. One of the early prototypes and I noticed because I was there, of their DNS panel, they built a Netlify function to actually ping and let you know when your DNS is ready.
Oh, see, that's a perfect use for functions. Yeah, I love that. This is the fun thing about the whole Lambda thing, is that you can give yourself permission to write an app that just does one little thing.
Yeah.
And you can deploy that one little thing and not worry about it, and it'll scale independently. And yeah, that's cool. It's a good use case.
It was the CEO of Netlify. It was his weekend project. He like I think on a Thursday, something like in the middle of the week, he's like, I have this idea for a feature. And then Monday he's like, okay, can you put this in the UI? And I was like, okay.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. But speaking of which, I wanted to ask one more question. Like, this has probably been the most organic conversation that answered all my questions that I had prepared. I'm looking at the questions. We answered pretty much everything I had prepared.
Oh,
except, how did you get begin.com?
Oh, right. Yeah. This is a fun question. And this is a good one maybe for the users. This was something I had to learn myself when we got this startup going. So my co-founder, Ryan, gets full credit for running this process. And maybe people can get some value out of this, because I think a lot of people will assume you can't get a cool 5-letter .com domain name, but anybody can do it. And it isn't all that hard, but you've got to come in with some basic rules. So the first rule is you don't know what the domain will be until you find it. So you got to let go and put that intention out in the universe and be sort of yogic about it and be like, okay, I want to get a .com, but I'm not going to be attached to what the actual letters of the .com are. You then have to narrow your field and understand, like, there's a lot of words out there. What is the word that you want for your .com, and how many letters does it have? Because these things do cost more depending on how many letters there are. The next thing you need to do after you've got, your thing, what we said was we wanted to have a positive verb that was 5 letters or less. So we went to the dictionary and we got all those words, and I think there was thousands of them. And we hired a domain broker to help us go through that list and start finding these people and contacting them and see if they wanted to do a deal that was within our budget. And we got to letter B before we found someone. Now, the cost of these can be expensive. They can go into 6 figures for sure. But you can do like 4 or 5 figure deal for a .com that's really good. And that's still a lot of money, but I will argue that it is worth it for your credibility and for the brand. And it also shows you got some hustle and you can find that thing. So that gets you a way in the door. When you're talking to investors later, they're going to know you're really serious about this thing. The person we found for Begin was actually not as price sensitive as they wanted to be involved in a startup. And so we were able to negotiate a deal on equity. And I think another startup out there listening to this right now can take these lessons and hopefully use them. You just got to not care what your name's going to be until you find it. That's really the trick. And I think this process, by the way, also took us 6 months.
Okay.
So it was not very easy. We had to work on like a code name and stealth mode for a while before we actually got the thing buttoned up. And even at first I was like, I don't know, is this good? Because we'd looked at so many domains, I wasn't even sure. And then, yeah, it's good. It's 5 letters and it's positive and it starts early in the alphabet by accident.
Yeah. So I asked a question because I thought it was way more intentional than that. Because Begin, it feels like it fits the product so well.
Well, I'm not a fatalist, but there is, some serendipity in all this, and it did work out. It does suit it very well. And, I guess you could grab any 5-letter positive verb and work your way down a list and find something, or just add LeFi at the end or whatever, and you'll be able to make that work. I've been buying vanity domains, like they're going out of style ever since we started getting these weird TLDs. I've got like coding.pizza or something. And
Okay. Well, I will have to admit, I do have opensauce.pizza. So,
see, that's a good one.
Which is my side project.
That's a good one.
Yeah. It was completely, and I've talked about it on the podcast quite a few times. So folks, opensauce.pizza, check it out. But it was basically a side project to learn the GraphQL API GitHub. And I was just looking, I think the pizza TLD came out and I was like, I need to think of something to go with pizza.
That's exactly what I did too. I was like, I don't have a project, but this TLD is too good to not use. It's so funny.
Yeah, I have quite a few. I mean, a lot of them have my name in it, BW Dev and BW Live. But I do have a couple other ones like embreadable.club.
And then every year, you probably like me, you get the renewal notice and you're like, this is a waste of money. And then you pay it.
Yeah, I actually did drop Embreadable. If anybody wants embreadable.club, I just dropped it because I'm just like, a couple years into this, I'm like, there's nothing happening here.
Yeah. There needs to be a developer tool that lets us exercise the feeling of buying a domain spontaneously, but not actually spending the money on it. Maybe like an escrow or something.
I need AI to basically, just based on the domain name, generate a website and I'll just stand up there with a bunch of stock photos, and then I'll feel good about myself because there's something pointed at it.
You'll probably close a seed round in like 10 minutes.
Okay, I've got some work to do. So let's go ahead and wrap up this podcast. And I appreciate you chatting about Begin. I love the story. I love the product. I didn't even mention I leverage it for one of my Twitch bots. It's called Get Twitch.
Right.
Yeah, Get Twitch is basically connecting GitHub and Twitch together. So that way, whenever you start a repo while I'm live on Twitch, something happens.
Dope. That's a great use case. That's awesome. I love it.
Yeah. Huh. It's not in production right now because I had to clean up a bunch of the code. And so I cleaned it up. So I need to deploy it again. Actually, it might be deploying. I haven't even logged into Begin since the first time I clicked it. So it could be still running.
Any commits would have deployed.
Yeah. It turns out like I'm on a club with 1,000 other folks. So.
Exactly.
But moving on, let's actually move into jam picks. These are projects that we're jamming on. It doesn't have to be projects. It doesn't have to be code related. It could be food related. We've definitely had the gambit of all different types of recommendations. But as you're thinking, I'm going to mention my picks because it got mentioned in passing. So just last week, me and Anthony Campolo, Anthony was on this podcast quite a few episodes ago, and he talked about Redwood Js. And he basically, as a bootcamp student, was like doing DevRel for Redwood on his spare time for fun. And then like wrote a bunch of tutorials and docs and stuff like that for them as a bootcamp student. Anyway, he just got his new job and did not even graduate the bootcamp. I'm not sure how that works, but he's working full time now.
Yeah, that's great.
But he basically walked me through how to build a Redwood site. So I mentioned OpenSauce.pizza. I'm actually working on this sort of recommendation engine for contributions to projects. Think of like Yelp, but for open source, which is like, I just figured out the pitch on Twitch, which I did not mean to rap, but I just did. But we built this site in like about a 30 minutes on stream live in front of people. I went back and did another live stream. Wow. And I connected a database, which probably should have only took 5 minutes, but it took me a little longer as I was learning Postgres and error-driven development. But I'm using another episode that we had was Superbase. Superbase was actually, they're in their beta right now and finished YC. Like they started 2020, beginning of 2020, the founders hung out in Singapore and then COVID hit. So they just basically did their entire YC batch in Singapore the entire time remotely.
That's great.
Which is amazing story. Hats off to them. They raised a seed round after YC. Yeah, so I connected Superbase. I'm loving the interaction, authentication, stuff like that. So if you want to talk about code names, it's actually in my org. It's OpenSauce/FlavaFlav. That's the current code name because I haven't thought of a name yet and I had to think of it on the fly. So FlavaFlav is the repo.
Man, don't change that. That's good.
Yeah, I might even, check out this whole brokerage thing.
Yeah.
Well, I need to actually do the AI thing first. I'll get funded on that first. I think that's going to be $1 billion idea.
Oh, easy.
But yeah, I'm loving that stack. And you'd also ask off stream about Redwood and what they're like. Tom Preston Werner, he actually started Hammer.js and then it was like code name. Eventually, they renamed it to Redwood. It's basically Rails, but in Node and JavaScript and React.
Love it.
Yeah, it's a beautiful merriment of all these sort of things that I learned my entire career with all scaffolding, which is what I love, thanks to like Prisma and all this other stuff.
React community so badly needs to have some strong opinionated help. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think it's great to see that there's more of this happening now. And we're getting a little bit farther along the conventions versus the configurations. Somebody else should write that Webpack config. Ideally, no one should have to write a Webpack config, but
yeah, going back like what we just had a whole conversation about, like I learned Webpack and I spent way too much time getting very good at it. And I haven't touched a Webpack config in like probably a year and a half. Like stuff just works, all these new tools, Next.js and everything like that. It just, you start a project and you just sort of set it and forget it, sort of.
Yeah, and that's really how it should be, especially for a module system. I mean, come on, JavaScript. Everybody's had modules for so long. And in true JavaScript fashion, we now have like 3 of them. So it's
excellent.
Yeah.
I did have one more pick, which I recently picked up a copper pan, which I don't know if this is like a US thing or something, but it's like the late night television infomercial type skillets where like it's nonstick, but it's not Teflon based. My in-laws had one like a couple years ago and I loved it. But I've been hardcore stainless steel. Like I use what's in the kitchen, like in actual kitchens, like restaurants. So I've always been like really into cooking and using proper equipment. But this copper pan, $14 at a Walmart near you, it's actually pretty legit.
Really?
I'm actually really loving it.
Yeah. Was like better heat distribution?
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, something like that. I didn't really watch the whole infomercial, but it's like as seen on TV. But yeah, nothing sticks. I made like a General Tso type chicken in there, sauce and all. It just slides right out the side of the pan. So I'm like, I don't know. I feel like I'm cheating a little bit, but I'm also really loving cooking with it. So copper, it sounds like the worst thing you could do, but I'm sold.
Yeah, I've never tried that. I need to try that now. My whole like COVID adventure has culminated in me being able to now properly scramble eggs in a cast iron pan, which took roughly a year to get right.
It's low and slow. That's how you cook eggs. And I'm a big cast iron fan as well. I don't know. I just do I've done a lot of cooking this year. Like no joke. Every meal.
Yeah, us too. It's I love the cooking. I hate the dishes though. I gotta say, yeah. I'm over it. I'm ready to go eat out again. So is it my turn? Do I get to do a pick?
Yeah. If you got any picks, hook us up.
Yeah. So I've been loving. And the audience has probably heard this a billion times already, but I'm going to be billion and one. I've been loving Deno the last few months. Well, I guess I kind of got on a little bit early to the Deno train, but I was early to the Node thing too. And it is becoming just a joy to work with. So Deno, for the people that don't know, first of all, it might be pronounced Dino. It's a JavaScript runtime. It's a play on the word Node. It's from the original creators of Node, and it's kind of a do-over. I'm sure they wouldn't like me characterizing it that way, but there's a lot of stuff that Node has that it can't get rid of because it would break millions of people's apps. And so Deno is kind of asking the question, well, what if we got to start fresh? What would this look like? And it looks fresh, and it's very fast, and it's got just so many nice little features built in that you don't have to think about as much as you normally would. So it comes with built-in testing, built-in linting, built-in formatting. Just added a command in Deno 1.7 that is blowing my mind, where you can compile your app into a binary for any platform, and it'll run just like it was compiled with like a C++ or Rust or whatever. So you get to package things the way that more compiled languages would. Other thing I'm loving is it comes with built-in TypeScript support. So you can write TypeScript, but you don't have to compile it. It does all that for you. So you just get this sort of natural JavaScript-y rigorous runtime that's very portable and has everything built in. So if you haven't checked out Deno and you're a front-end dev, I highly recommend it. I think you'll have a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely. So I mentioned live streaming. That's something I picked up this year. I actually did a little comparison test between Node, Deno, and then Miles Borens and a couple other Nodes folks created JSTime.
Oh, yeah.
JSTime is like definitely not.
I saw that.
Yeah, it's not production ready, and there's a lot of missing features. But just doing like side-by-side comparison of, I forgot what my test was. It was some trivial Node thing. Actually, I think I did set timeout. I might have just set timeout for like 2 milliseconds and then looked at to see how long it took to respond. And like with Node, it took like probably like 4 seconds to respond, like probably longer than that. But then with like Deno, it was like take away the set timeout and it was like 25 milliseconds, which is like kind of insane.
Yeah. The cold start's fantastic, and this is long-term, especially for the serverless community, this is going to be a very big deal. And Node probably can't get faster at this point.
Yeah.
So Node's probably hit its local maximum, whereas Deno's already started from a faster place, and they've got some structural advantages, and they don't have to deal with the baggage of the past. So
is that what you're talking about earlier when you're saying it'll probably get down to 0 with the cold starts if they switch runtimes?
No, well, this is just the runtime's cold start. I think at a certain point, Amazon's going to crack the nut of booting VMs, like the whole thing, not just the runtime, but the thing running the runtime.
Yeah.
I think they're going to drop that to 0. Right now, the overhead of booting a Firecracker container is somewhere around 40 milliseconds. And then, a Node or a Deno on a hot day, running in peak performance mode might be able to cold start itself around the same amount of time. So you're still seeing a latency of around 80, 70 milliseconds. And I expect the Deno part to drop to 0, and I expect the operating system part from Amazon to drop to 0. It's just a matter of time. And Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you might have a use case where that matters. I don't know who does, but like we have to get rid of that last 20 milliseconds is probably, at massive scale, huge workloads. Maybe that's going to make a difference in your bill. I don't know, but we're fast approaching zero cost abstraction cloud computing.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to it, being the consumer of all this win, and
yes.
Also I'm looking forward to continuing consuming Begin and seeing what you all have in store as well. So
thanks so much, Brian.
Listeners, definitely check out begin.com. They put a lot of work into getting that URL, so don't forget it. And also keep spreading the jam.
That's all the time we have for today. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, find us on Twitter at JAMstack Radio. To learn more about Heavybit, visit heavybit.com. And while you're there, check out their library. It's packed with amazing talks on sales, marketing, product, and general management from founders of developer tools companies and other industry leaders.